On the surface, it worked. Bohemia became Catholic again, at least officially. Church attendance was high because it was compulsory. The sacraments were administered according to Roman rite. The chalice, the Hussite symbol, vanished from public worship. But beneath the surface, something more complicated was happening. The Bohemian peasantry adopted Catholicism with a particular local flavor that drove Jesuit missionaries to periodic despair. Saints were venerated, but the saints that mattered most were Czech saints, Wenceslaus, Ludmilla, Aldebert, and, in whispered tradition, Jan Hus himself, who was remembered not as a heretic but as a martyr. Religious festivals followed the Catholic calendar, but incorporated folk customs, songs, dances, rituals that predated the Counter-Reformation and, in some cases, predated Christianity itself. The Bohemian peasant went to Mass on Sunday and did things on Monday that would have horrified the bishop, not out of defiance, but out of a cultural continuity so deep that it operated below the level of conscious resistance. The unity of brethren, the Jednota Bratarska, direct spiritual descendants of the Hussite movement, were driven underground and eventually into exile. Their most famous exile, Jan Amos Komensky, Comenius, became one of the most influential educational thinkers in European history, writing from the Netherlands works that would shape pedagogy across the continent. The brethren who could not emigrate practiced their faith in secret, gathering in homes, in forests, in barns, maintaining a continuous thread of Protestant worship that the Habsburg authorities could suppress but never fully sever. This underground tradition meant that when religious tolerance finally returned to Bohemia in 1781 under Joseph II's Patent of Toleration, there were still communities ready to emerge and reclaim their heritage. The thread had held for over 150 years. The third factor was structural, and it had nothing to do with culture or religion. It was economic. The Habsburgs needed Bohemia. The basin's agricultural productivity, its mineral resources, and its manufacturing base, particularly textiles and glass, made it one of the most economically valuable provinces in the empire. This meant that however much the Habsburgs wanted to Germanize the population culturally, they could not afford to devastate it economically. The peasants who spoke Czech in their kitchens were the same peasants who grew the grain, raised the livestock, worked the remaining mines, and produced the goods that filled Habsburg tax coffers. This created a paradox that ran through the entire period of Habsburg rule. The empire depended on the productivity of a population whose cultural identity it was simultaneously trying to erase. The result was a kind of grudging accommodation. Czech speakers were disadvantaged, marginalized, and excluded from power, but they were not destroyed, because destroying them would have meant destroying the economic base of one of the empire's richest provinces. The Bohemian glass industry is a small but vivid illustration of this paradox. Czech glassmakers developed techniques, particularly in cut crystal and colored glass, that made Bohemian glass famous across Europe. The products were exported under the Habsburg Imperial brand, sold in Vienna, Paris, and London as symbols of imperial sophistication. But the workshops where the glass was made were in Czech-speaking villages in the Bohemian highlands, operated by Czech-speaking craftsmen who passed their skills from father to son in a language the empire considered obsolete. The empire profited from a culture it was trying to eliminate. The culture survived in part because the empire needed its products. Then, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, something shifted. The current that had been running underground for 300 years broke the surface. The Czech national revival, the České národní obrození, began not with a political movement, but with a philological one. Scholars decided to prove that Czech was not a dying peasant dialect, but a language with a history, a grammar, a literature, and a future. Josef Dobrovský, a Jesuit-educated priest and linguist, published the first modern grammar of Czech in 1809. He approached the language with scientific rigor, documenting its structure, tracing its history, and demonstrating its relationship to other Slavic languages. Dobrovský himself was pessimistic about Czech's prospects. He reportedly believed he was writing the grammar of a language that would soon be dead. He was wrong, but his pessimism is revealing. Even among the revivalists, the survival of Czech seemed uncertain. Josef Jungmann went further. Between 1834 and 1839, he published a 5-volume Czech-German dictionary that was more than a reference work. It was a monument. Jungmann invented new Czech words for concepts that had been expressed only in German for generations. He translated major works of European literature into Czech to demonstrate that the language was capable of sophistication, nuance, and beauty. He did for Czech what Dante had done for Italian and Luther had done for German. He proved that a vernacular language could carry the full weight of civilization. František Palacký delivered the political dimension. His monumental history of the Czech nation in Bohemia and Moravia, published in installments beginning in 1836, reframed Bohemian history not as a subplot of German or Habsburg history, but as an independent national narrative with its own logic, its own heroes, and its own meaning. Palacký placed the Hussite period at the center of this narrative, not as an embarrassing episode of heresy, but as the defining moment of Czech national identity, when the people of Bohemia had stood against empire and demanded the right to live according to their own conscience. The effect was electric. Within a generation, the revival spread from scholars to the middle class to the streets. Czech-language newspapers appeared, Czech-language theaters opened, Czech-language schools were established, at first privately, later with grudging imperial permission. A Czech-speaking intelligentsia, teachers, journalists, lawyers, doctors, emerged as a social class that had not existed since White Mountain. The language that was supposed to die had not only survived, but was being reborn, and with it came a political consciousness that would ultimately prove more dangerous to the Habsburg Empire than any army. The 19th century accelerated everything. Industrialization transformed Bohemia from an agricultural province into one of the most productive manufacturing regions in the empire. Factories needed workers. Workers moved to cities. Czech-speaking peasants flooded into Prague, Brno, Pilsen, and Ostrava, tipping the demographic balance of cities that had been German-speaking for generations. By the late 1800s, Prague was becoming a Czech-speaking city again, not through political decree, but through sheer demographic weight. The political implications were impossible to ignore. Czech representatives demanded greater autonomy within the empire. Czech political parties organized. Czech cultural institutions, the National Theater, the National Museum, the so-called gymnastic movement, became expressions of a national identity that was no longer underground, but fully visible, fully vocal, and fully unwilling to remain a subordinate component of a German-speaking imperial order. The Habsburgs tried to manage this pressure through incremental concessions and careful balancing of Czech and German interests.
it was not enough. The fundamental contradiction, a Slavic nation inside a German empire, a distinct identity inside a structure that demanded assimilation, could be managed but not resolved. It was settled by collapse. In 1918, the Habsburg Empire disintegrated under the combined pressures of World War I, military defeat, and the centrifugal forces of its own unresolved national conflicts. On October 28, 1918, Czechoslovakia declared independence. The philosopher Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk became its first president, and the first symbol the new nation reached for, the name it invoked to explain who it was and where it came from, was Jan Hus.
500 years after his burning, the priest from the Bethlehem Chapel became the founding spirit of a modern republic. But independence, once gained, was not kept. The pattern of Bohemian history, freedom followed by subjugation, resurgence followed by suppression, repeated itself with brutal efficiency in the 20th century. In 1938, the Munich Agreement handed the Sudetenland, Bohemia's German-speaking border regions, to Nazi Germany. Britain and France, seeking to appease Hitler, did not consult Czechoslovakia. Masaryk's successor, Edvard Beneš, was presented with a fait accompli. The Czechs called it Mnichov, a single word that still carries the weight of betrayal. In March 1939, Germany occupied the rest of Bohemia and Moravia, abolishing Czechoslovakia entirely and establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia under direct Nazi administration. Czech universities were closed, student leaders were executed. The village of Lidice was razed to the ground in 1942 in reprisal for the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. Every man shot, every woman sent to concentration camps, every child either killed or sent to German families for re-education. The name Lidice was supposed to disappear from maps and memory. Liberation came in 1945, but not freedom. By 1948, a communist coup backed by the Soviet Union had transformed Czechoslovakia into a satellite state behind the Iron Curtain. The pattern held: a foreign power, a suppressed identity, a language and a history forced into an ideological mold not of its own making. The communists, like the Habsburgs before them, tried to co-opt Bohemian history rather than erase it. The Hussite Wars were reframed as a class struggle. Žižka was rehabilitated as a proto-proletarian hero. Tabor was celebrated as an early experiment in communism. The historical narrative was distorted, but even in distortion, it retained its gravitational pull. No regime governing the Czech lands could afford to ignore the story entirely. In 1968, the Prague Spring, an attempt to create socialism with a human face under Alexander Dubček, was crushed by Soviet tanks. The image of Czechoslovak citizens standing in front of armored vehicles in Wenceslas Square became one of the defining photographs of the Cold War. The message was familiar. Bohemia had tried to assert itself, and an empire had responded with force. 21 more years of normalization followed, a gray, suffocating period of enforced conformity and political stagnation. And then, in November 1989, the pattern broke for the last time. The story of how it broke and what it meant belongs to the final chapter. It began with students. On November 17, 1989, the 50th anniversary of a Nazi crackdown on Czech universities, thousands of students marched through Prague to commemorate the day. The march was permitted. What was not permitted was what it became.
As the column moved through the narrow streets toward the center of the city, it swelled. Office workers joined. Older couples joined. People who had not attended a public demonstration in 20 years joined. By the time the marchers reached Národní třída, National Avenue, they numbered in tens of thousands, and the chant had shifted from commemoration to demand. The riot police were waiting. They formed a line across the avenue, white helmets gleaming under the streetlights, shields interlocked. The marchers stopped. For a long moment, the two sides faced each other in silence, the kind of silence that precedes either retreat or catastrophe. Then the police charged. Batons fell on students who had sat down on the pavement with their hands raised, offering flowers. The violence was captured on amateur video and broadcast across the country within hours. It was the last mistake the regime would make. Within days, the protests had spread to every major city in Czechoslovakia. In Prague, the crowds in Wenceslas Square grew from thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. They filled the square from the National Museum at the top to the bottom of the boulevard, spilling into side streets, standing on balconies, leaning from windows. And they did something that no riot police could answer. They jangled their keys. The sound, hundreds of thousands of metal keys shaken simultaneously, was eerie, musical, and unmistakable. It was the sound of a lock being opened. It was the sound of a people telling a regime that its time was up. Máme toho dost. We have had enough.
The man who emerged to give the revolution its voice was not a general, not a politician, not a party functionary. He was a playwright. Václav Havel had spent most of the previous 2 decades as a dissident, writing plays that could not be performed, essays that could only be circulated in samizdat, letters that were read by secret police before they were read by their intended recipients. He had been imprisoned multiple times. He had worked during one period of forced labor in a brewery. He was slight, mustachioed, and spoke with a quiet intensity that was the opposite of the bombastic rhetoric that communist leaders had inflicted on Czechoslovakia for 40 years. Havel had written in his 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless, a line that had become the intellectual foundation of Czech dissent. The system, he argued, depended on citizens living within a lie, performing rituals of loyalty they did not believe, repeating slogans they knew to be false, participating in a collective fiction that sustained the regime's power. The alternative was simple and terrifying: to live within the truth, to say what you actually believed, to stop pretending. In November 1989, an entire nation stopped pretending at the same time. The Civic Forum, the umbrella opposition movement that Havel helped organize, negotiated with the collapsing communist government over a period of weeks. There was no civil war, no mass executions, no storming of government buildings. The transfer of power was accomplished through negotiation, public pressure, and the sheer impossibility of governing a country in which no one was willing to perform obedience anymore. On December 29, 1989, Václav Havel was elected president of Czechoslovakia by the same parliament that had, weeks earlier, been a rubber stamp for a one-party state. A playwright sat in the castle above the Vltava, the same castle where Primus-lid dukes had ruled, where Charles IV had held imperial court, where Habsburg governors had administered 3 centuries of suppression, where Nazi protectors had planned the liquidation of Czech culture, and where communist presidents had presided over the longest period of enforced silence in Bohemian history. The world called it the Velvet Revolution. The Czechs accepted the name, though some found it almost too gentle for what it meant. What it meant was this: after 369 years, from White Mountain in 1620 to the jangling keys of 1989, Bohemia had taken itself back. But taken itself back to what? This is the question that the years after 1989 posed with uncomfortable clarity. Independence, once achieved, requires content. A nation that defines itself primarily by what it has endured, by the occupations it survived, the empires it outlasted, the languages it refused to forget, must eventually answer a harder question: what is it for? The first answer came quickly, and it was a separation. On January 1st, 1993, Czechoslovakia peacefully dissolved into two independent states, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Velvet Divorce, as it was called, was negotiated by politicians rather than demanded by popular referendum, and it carried a faint melancholy even for those who supported it. The union that Masaryk had forged in 1918 lasted 74 years through democracy, occupation, communism, and revolution, and it ended not with a bang, but with a bureaucratic procedure. Two nations that had shared a state decided calmly that they would be better off as neighbors than as roommates. The Czech Republic that emerged was, in territorial terms, almost exactly Bohemia and Moravia. The same basin, the same mountains, the same rivers that had defined the land since the Boii gave it a name 24 centuries earlier. The borders had barely changed. The people inside them had changed enormously, shaped by every wave of migration, conquest, conversion, suppression, and revival that had washed through the basin since the Iron Age. But the land remained, the mountains remained, and the stubborn, almost geological persistence of identity that had carried this place through Celtic settlement, Germanic invasion, Slavic migration, Premyslid dynasty, Hussite revolution, Habsburg erasure, Nazi occupation, communist suffocation, and Velvet liberation, that persistence remained too. What does Bohemia mean today? Walk through Prague and the layers are visible if you know where to look. The Celtic oppidum at Zavist is a forested hill south of the city. No signs, no tourists, just earthworks slowly dissolving back into the landscape. The Romanesque rotunda of St. Martin, built in the 11th century, sits in the Vyšehrad fortress complex above the Vltava, one of the oldest standing structures in the city, its walls remembering the Premyslids. The Charles Bridge carries the name and the ambition of a 14th century emperor who believed Prague could be the center of the world. The Bethlehem Chapel, demolished after White Mountain, reconstructed in the 1950s, stands in the Old Town as a reminder of the man who preached in Czech and died for it. The bullet holes in the facades along Reslava Street mark the spot where the assassins of Reinhard Heydrich made their last stand in the crypt of a Baroque church in 1942. The memorial plaques on Narodní Třída mark the place where batons fell on students in 1989 and a revolution began. Every stone in this city is a sediment layer. Every street name is a palimpsest. And the bronze statue of Jan Hus in the Old Town Square, erected in 1915 on the 500th anniversary of his burning, stands at the center of it all, silent and bearded, gazing south toward nothing in particular, surrounded by tourists who mostly do not know his name.
Hus is not the only ghost in the square. Beneath the pavement, archaeologists have found traces of Romanesque buildings, medieval market stalls, and older structures whose origins are uncertain. The astronomical clock on the wall of the old town hall has been ticking since 1410, 5 years before Hus burned, 6 centuries before the tourists who gather every hour to watch its mechanical apostles rotate through their tiny doors. Time in Prague is not linear. It accumulates. It folds. The past does not recede here. It composites, layer upon layer, until the present is simply the topmost stratum of a deposit that goes down further than anyone can excavate. There is a temptation in telling a story this long to impose a single narrative arc, to say that Bohemia's history is a story of resistance or survival or freedom. These words are not wrong, but they are not enough. The Boii did not resist, they were displaced. The Premyslids did not fight for freedom, they built a feudal state. Charles IV did not embody survival, he embodied ambition. The Hussites resisted, yes, but they also fractured, compromised, and ultimately lost the peace they had won in war. The Habsburg centuries were not simply darkness, they were also the period when Bohemian glass, Bohemian music, and Bohemian brewing traditions achieved international recognition. The communist era was not simply oppression, it was also the period when Havel, Kundera, Forman, and countless others produced works of literature, philosophy, and film that belong to the permanent treasury of European culture. Bohemia's story is not a single thread. It is a weave, messy, contradictory, full of broken strands and unexpected knots. What holds it together is not a narrative, but a fact. The land, the basin, the mountains, the rivers that converge toward the center. The geographic reality that has shaped every human decision made within its borders for 25 centuries. From the Boii choosing where to build their Apida, to Charles IV choosing where to build his bridge, to Havel choosing where to stand when he addressed 500,000 people jangling their keys in a square named after a medieval saint.
Stand in that square one more time. It is spring. The cobblestones are warm beneath your feet. The astronomical clock strikes the hour, and the tourists raise their phones. A tram rattles past on the street below. Somewhere, someone is pouring a Pilsner, the beer that was invented in the Bohemian city of Plzeň in 1842, a fact that the Czechs consider at least as historically significant as anything involving emperors or crusades. The statue of Jan Hus catches the afternoon light. His bronze face is calm. His hands are empty. He carries no weapon, no book, no chalice, just the posture of a man who said what he believed and would not take it back. Behind him, invisible but present, stand all the others. The Boii ironworkers who gave this land its name. The Premyslid dukes who built a kingdom from a fortress on a hill. The miners of Kutahora who traded their lungs for silver. The stonemasons who raised St. Vitus stone by stone. The farmers who kept speaking Czech in their kitchens for 300 years because no one could make them stop. The students who sat down on Narodní třída with flowers in their hands. The playwright who became a president because he refused to live within a lie. 2,500 years of people standing in this basin, under these mountains, beside these rivers, building, burning, rebuilding, forgetting, remembering, being conquered, being erased, and coming back. Every empire that entered this basin believed it would be the last. The Celts gave way to the Germans. The Germans gave way to the Slavs. The Premyslides gave way to the Luxembourgs. The Luxembourgs gave way to the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs gave way to the Republic. The Republic gave way to the Nazis. The Nazis gave way to the Communists. The Communists gave way to the jangling of keys. Bohemia outlasted them all, not because it was stronger, not because it was luckier, but because the people who lived here, generation after generation, century after century, refused to forget who they were. They kept the language, they kept the songs, they kept the memory of a priest who burned for telling the truth, and a general who fought blind, and a playwright who said that the power of the powerless was the power of truth. The name has changed, the borders have shifted, the language was banned and reborn, the religion was imposed and subverted and abandoned and remembered, but the basin remains, the mountains remain, and the thing that lives inside them, the stubborn, unkillable insistence on being this and not something else, that remains too. It has remained for 25 centuries. There is no reason to believe it will stop now.